Today's topic of conversation is my preview for the 2018 German Grand Prix. It's been 2 weeks, two very, very long weeks since the last race in Silverstone. But this weekend, Formula 1 returns to the Hockenheim Ring. 2-year absence. Big fan of this track, I am. And before we jump into our predictions, a little bit of a roundup of FP1, FP2, I first want to go over a little bit of news that has gone on in the world of Formula 1 at the beginning of this weekend, most notably contracts. Now, we're getting into silly season, my favourite time of the year in Formula 1. Yes, we have the summer break, which, I'm not a huge fan of the summer break anyway. That's a different topic for another day. But at the moment, silly season. This time of the year where all the drivers are swapping, chopping, changing teams. And that is currently going on at the moment. No deals have gone through yet of any driver changes for next year. But we have this weekend seen two major contract agreements from two of the biggest seats in Formula 1. Both coming at the same team. And that is Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas both signing new deals until 2020. Hamilton, we'll start with his deal first. He is now the highest paid British athlete of all time. So I'm sure he's very happy with that. And his contract will see him right the way through 2019 and 2020. Valtteri Bottas, his deal is worth considerably less. However, his deal is slightly different to Lewis's. Valtteri, his contract is for 2019 with the option to stay for 2020. So that's a little bit of a different sort of contract than he had this season. This season, he just had the 1-year contract, very similar to that in 2017. It looked like he would have a 1 year again in 2019 and then 2020 if he stayed at Mercedes. But it looks like Mercedes are putting all their faith now in Valtteri, which I think is the right thing to do. I think he's had a really, really impressive season. The points really don't tell the story of his season. It's very similar to Max Verstappen at the beginning of last season. Luck was just plaguing the whole of that season for Max, and I think the same thing very much is happening with Valtteri this season. Really not going his way in Silverstone. Another race for him, just didn't quite get a plan at all, and so I think he'll be really looking to bounce back this weekend in Hockenheim. And when we get onto my predictions a bit later on, he's going to be up there with the likes of Sebastian Vettel and the Ferraris. The drivers I think are going to have a really strong weekend at the German Grand Prix. Apart from that, we haven't really seen much news in the world of Formula 1. We've seen a few updates brought to this weekend, most notably from McLaren and Toro Rosso. They've had a few aerodynamic updates, but apart from that, nothing too much. The other major story going into qualifying we have is that Daniel Ricciardo bringing plenty of engine updates this weekend will ultimately mean he will start in dead last, P20, come qualifying. So he'll be a bit gutted with that. I think he would have been in with a chance this weekend, judging FP1 and FP2 times. The Red Bull definitely looks a quick car this weekend, so a little bit disappointing for Daniel, and he's been in a bit of a rut at the moment in terms of results. Max has slowly started to claw back some points in the championship, and I think Ricciardo is ready for that reset button now, and maybe his own contract worries, which we'll just talk about in a second, maybe that is really clouding his judgment. Ricciardo really didn't want to stay at Red Bull next season, I believe. I think he really wanted to try and push through a move to Ferrari, push through a move to Mercedes, but Raikkonen and Bottas have both been solid, and with Charles Leclerc being one of the standout drivers of the season so far, that Ferrari door is completely shut. And like I say, with Bottas doing a really solid job at Mercedes, and Ocon as well, he's looking promising, I would say. Not quite Charles Leclerc levels, I believe, but promising from Esteban Ocon. Ricciardo, there's just no way through, and he hasn't signed a deal yet with Red Bull, but I imagine in the coming weeks, maybe just before next weekend's race at the Hungaroring, or maybe during the summer break, I imagine Ricciardo will have a contract with Red Bull completely ironed out until 2020, because if you weren't aware, all the big boys are signed up till 2020. Vettel, Bottas, Hamilton, Verstappen, all of them are locked in their seats until 2020. So that means in 2021, when we have the big regulation change, engine changes, aerodynamic changes, all the drivers will be changing as well. So I imagine maybe Hamilton will retire around there. Maybe Sebastian will retire around there as well. We will see. But I think that is going to be when silly season hits its peak in 2020 going into 2021. But that's all the news that's going on in the build-up for this German Grand Prix. Let's talk about FP1, FP2 and FP3. I believe the results have recently just finished from that. We're just over a couple of hours away from qualifying, so let's just jump straight into those results then. And starting off with FP1 then, Daniel Ricciardo, despite starting this race weekend in dead last, he topped the timesheet, so I'm sure he's very happy with that, showing that the Red Bull does have the pace, but as I always say, just a little disclaimer, practice times are never truly representative of what the times are actually going to be over qualifying, over the race weekend, but you can get a rough idea of the whereabouts the pecking order is. I mean, just looking at the top 10 now, you've got the top teams, the Ferraris, both Red Bulls, both Mercedes, both Haas cars, and then you've got the Renault and Sauber, so FP1 looks fairly relative to what the actual result might end up looking like. But like I say, Ricciardo was on top by 0.004 of a second over Lewis Hamilton. Max Verstappen in third, 2 tenths behind his teammate. Fourth, Sebastian Vettel. Fifth, Valtteri Bottas. All of the top 5 within 3 tenths of each other. P6 was Kimi Räikkönen, P7, and best of the rest, Romain Grosjean, looks again like he might just have the edge over Kevin Magnussen this weekend, but he's got to keep it clean. He's got to keep it clean. Last weekend was not a good race for Grosjean. It was confirmed that he was the cause of the crash with Kevin Magnussen on lap 1. The incident later on in the race with Carlos Sainz was a bit of a racing incident, but if you're going to put the blame on anyone, I think it would be more maybe Grosjean, but I think racing incident. But he's got to bounce back once again this weekend, and he really needs just a couple of weekends just to catch that form. And if he can do it here this weekend and then lead it into Hungaroring, going into that summer break, he'll be on a high. So fingers crossed for Roman. Then was his teammate in P8, Kevin Magnussen. P9, Charles Leclerc. A good solid job from him once again in that Sauber car. P10, best of the rest, I was going to say, but final one in the top 10, Nico Hülkenberg for the Renault team. The lead Renault once again this weekend. And then, best of the drivers outside the top 10, Sergio Perez, Fernando Alonso, Lance Stroll, Carlos Sainz, Brendan Hartley, P15, 16th Sirotkin, 17th Nicholas Latifi, one of the 2 sort of reserve drivers that were brought in this weekend to do their FP1 sessions. Pierre Gasly, P18, Antonio Giovinazzi driving for Sauber. Oh, just a quick mention, Latifi was for Force India replacing Ocon, Giovinazzi replacing Ericsson for Sauber, and Van Dorn was the final of all the drivers, only completing 14 laps in 20th place. Incredibly, he only did one more lap than his teammate Fernando Alonso, so very limited running for McLaren this weekend. So Van Dorn has said that this was his worst Friday performance ever in Formula 1. That is the quotes flying around at the moment, and FP1 did not go the way of the McLaren. Just a quick note on the 2 drivers, Nicholas Latifi and Antonio Giovinazzi. I think out of the 2 of them, the most likely to get a seat next year would be Giovinazzi. I think he can really give Ericsson a run for his money, and now that Alfa Romeo have come in to that Sauber team, I think if Leclerc does move to Ferrari, Giovinazzi is the sensible option to replace him. And like I say, even with Ericsson, I think if Leclerc does stay, I think Giovinazzi would offer a better option than Ericsson. You think Giovinazzi, if you can't remember, last season in 2017, he started 2 of the opening races of the season, replacing Pascal Wehrlein, who was injured after a crash in the Race of Champions. And so Giovinazzi in those 2 races did, in the Australian Grand Prix, did his first ever race, drove a really solid race. I think he came home in P14 out of 22. Really solid job. Well, actually, it was out of 20 last year. Sorry, blimey, it's been 2 years since Manor in F1. That is crazy. Anyway, really solid job that was from Giovinazzi. His second race weekend in China didn't quite go to plan. Crashed twice in the same place, the final corner on the home straight. And so I think he deserves another chance. I think he's quick enough. He was solid in GP2. Fighting with Gasly, he was in GP2 for that championship. Came down to the final race. So I think he's definitely got the speed and talent, and I'd love to see him in the Sauber next season. But the only big drama in FP1 was the fact that Giovinazzi's engine cover flew off his car. I mean, you don't see that very often. I think the last time that happened was when it happened to one of the Lotus cars back in 2015, I believe it was. Their engine cover flew off the back in Bahrain. But if I'm being totally honest, it was a pretty spectacular incident, I can't deny. And then when Giovinazzi pulled into the pit, getting a view into the inside of the modern F1 car, it was pretty cool, to be fair. And if I can find the picture, I'll try and whack it up for you. But I know FOM and probably Sal were very, very cautious of hiding all of that, so probably might be a bit difficult. But anyways, that was FP1, and enjoyable session actually. And Ricciardo topping it. Happy days for him despite starting at the back. Moving on to FP2 then, Max Verstappen, the other Red Bull, topping the times once again just by the tiniest of margins over Lewis Hamilton, just 26 thousandths of a second this time. Valtteri Bottas this time is in P3, P4 and 5 with the two Ferraris, so they seem to be a little bit behind the two Ferraris. In this session as well, just quickly noting, Max Verstappen, despite finishing top of the times, did have an engine issue, so it's unclear what sort of consequences that will have going into qualifying and into the race. But at the moment, all seems fine, so that's something to keep an eye on over the weekend. Then in 6 and 7 was the two Haas cars. Daniel Ricciardo, nowhere near the top 10 in this session. Out of the two Haas cars, it was Grosjean again ahead of Magnussen, this time by 3/10. Their fight over this season, I think, has the real potential to be a really spicy one, and I think in Silverstone that was clear. So looking like this weekend that the two Haas cars are definitely the best of the rest team, and I think we're definitely going to be set up for another pretty decent scrap between the two of them. So Haas, I think for them, like mentioned in FP1, they need to keep their noses clean this weekend. Both drivers, I know Grosjean's the main culprit this season, but Magnussen as well, probably gone under the radar a little bit because of the fact that Grosjean has been pretty much dreadful in the start of the season. But Magnussen as well was thrown away a lot of chances to get big points. So both of them need a really solid weekend once again, especially after the shambles that was Silverstone. Charles Leclerc, P8, solid job again from the Sauber, so he looks like he's going to be able to score points once again this weekend. P9, Nico Hülkenberg, and P10 rounding out the top 10, Esteban Ocon. Other drivers of note further down the grid, Daniel Ricciardo and P13. But then also, something I just wanted to quickly note, the two Williams seem to be on the pace of the McLarens this weekend. Alonso P17, Van Dorn again P20, and like I say, an awful Friday from Stoffel. But the two Williams in between 18th and 19th, and after their flawed Silverstone performance from that car, not from the drivers, but from the car, just, I'll try and do a little video on that. I'm not too great on the aerodynamics, but I think it's something that you guys should be aware of, the issues that are going on with that Williams car, and the air distribution over that car is all wrong. In Silverstone, just to give it brief and in layman's terms, real basic terms, when they open the DRS flap, so to give them extra speed, what would happen is then when they closed it, they would still continue that speed, and going through the corners, they'd be going too quick. The rear end would spin out. And that's exactly what happened to both Williams cars, Stroll and Sorokin, at the British Grand Prix over practice. In the race, they seem to be a little bit more stable, but I think they're a little bit more cautious, both of them miles behind the field at Silverstone. But finally, moving on to practice 3. Wow, what a session. The first real wet session we have had all season long in Formula 1. We've had snowy conditions this season. We had that in testing in Barcelona, but finally we had a real wet session, which resulted in FP3, only 9 drivers actually completing time laps. Neither Haas cars did a lap, neither Red Bulls did a lap, neither Mercedes did a lap, nor McLaren, nor Renault, or one of the Renault drivers certainly. But, that being said, we did have 9 drivers that did complete laps, and of all people, Charles Leclerc was the top man in FP3, 4/10 clear of the next man in P2, which was Marcus Ericsson. And P3, Sergei Sorokin. So if that's the result on Sunday, I would be very happy indeed. I think that would really shake up the Formula 1 world. And Sorokin, just wanted to quickly note, again seems a bit quicker than Lance Stroll. I know this sort of session's very hard to judge, a wet session. However, again, Sorokin looks strong this weekend, and you know what? I'm really impressed with Sorokin this season. I think he's handled the pressure and himself really well, and I hope he gets to stay at Williams for another season. He's impressed me quite a lot, actually, more than Stroll did last season when he was a rookie. Stroll has also impressed me this year. He's been pretty quick, to be fair, Lance Stroll, and I think it's definitely gone under the radar considering how awful that Williams car is. I think the issue with Lance Stroll is still his attitude towards the team, his attitude towards Formula 1. I think Sorokin has definitely beat him there, but both Williams drivers I have been quietly impressed with this season, so it'll be interesting to see if they can pick up any points here this weekend at Hockenheim. I imagine with 3 DRS zones it might be difficult. They have an update coming at the Hungaroring, it seems, on that rear wing, so I think if anywhere the next time we might see them in points is in Belgium. I think the Hungaroring, more of a downforce orientated circuit, I think isn't really going to play into the strengths of their car, so it'll be interesting to see for sure. After those two is Sebastian Vettel in P4, P5 Pierre Gasly, P6 Brendan Hartley, P7 Nico Hülkenberg, P8 Kimi Räikkönen, and rounding out all the final drivers that actually completed laps in P9 was Lance Stroll. So that's all the times then from practice, and you know what, I think it's really hard to tell, especially with that wet FP3 session. I think it's so hard to tell where all these drivers are in terms of one another, and I think going into this weekend we could have a real cracker at Hockenheim, and I hope it stays on the calendar. They can sort out a brand new deal and make it stay. We know Liberty Media have said that they want 25 races on the calendar, and I believe a German Grand Prix should be there, whether it's the Nürburgring. Really like that circuit, but I prefer Hockenheim. Either of them we've seen great races from in the past, and I hope that they can sort out a deal and make it to stay. And Sebastian Vettel and Nico Hülkenberg have both said if either of them can pull out a really special result this weekend, all that's going to do is further help the people that put on the event and the German fans push for a new contract with Liberty. But finally, guys, let's move on to my favourite bit of the weekend, the predictions time. Now, last time out in Silverstone, Lewis Hamilton's backyard, Sebastian Vettel was the one able to ruin the party, and you know what? I think it might be the other way around this weekend. So let's quickly talk about qualifying, and then we'll talk about the race. I think in qualifying, I think Mercedes looked the best of all the teams. I think Ferrari are definitely hiding their pace. I think they're disguising it a little bit to try and sort of impress the fans once we get to quali and the race. I think in the wet conditions as well, that'll really throw up a few changes up and down the grid. Qualifying then, with my top 3, I'm going to go with a Lewis Hamilton pole position, a Sebastian Vettel second, and a Valtteri Bottas third. Pretty mainstream, I know, and I know usually on this channel I like to do a few random thrown out there results, but this weekend, let's be sensible. I think we're going to be given a really great race, but I think Verstappen being the only real Red Bull hope, I think he might struggle a little bit, not having that rear gunner with him in Ricciardo. And I think Vettel, in front of his home fans, going off the really impressive performance in Silverstone, I think he'll be ready and geared up for it. And I think Mercedes will be the better car this weekend. So I think, using my head, using a bit of logic this time out, I think we're going to go with a Hamilton, Vettel and Bottas. But I think in the race, like I said, I think we're going to have a pretty titanic race. And you know what? I can see it happening. I can see the Hamilton-Vettel contact. Yes, we're not going completely mainstream, guys. Do not worry. We're going to throw out a few wacky things in there, and I think, yeah, I can see it happening. I can see a real titanic battle between Hamilton and Vettel, and I think there will be contact at some point. And you know what? My winner for the German Grand Prix, his first win of the season, is going to go to Valtteri Bottas. I think P2, I'm going to give it to Max Verstappen, and P3, I'm going to, you see, Kimi, I'd like to give it to Kimi. There he is on screen right now. I'd like to give it to Kimi, but he's so up and down this season. Part of me thinks a Haas car could really benefit this weekend. They seem to be closer to the top 3 than the midfield. So, you know what? We're going to go with a K-Mag, P3. We're going to go for a second ever podium in F1. So, yeah, I'm expecting a carnage race. But I think I'm really looking forward to Hockenheim. Like I said, it's one of my favourite tracks of the season. I'm really happy to see it back. I'd love to know your predictions in the comments below. And just quickly, guys, before we round out this episode, if you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. It's very much appreciated, especially because videos have been a bit all over the place at the moment. Mainly because I've started off the summer. I was expecting to get all these videos out. But then what happened? Well, the laptop broke down, which is fantastic. I've been working more days than I should be, which is fantastic in terms of economically wise, but I've also got a new mic, which I've been setting up. I've had lots of issues with, especially with my laptop just blowing up every 2 seconds. But we finally got it working. We finally got it out just before qualifying. This video should be up. So hopefully at the end of the day, we should have a Formula E show. I'm going to move the Formula E show to a Saturday. I'm going to move the F1 show to a Tuesday. And I'm still reworking that a little bit because I want to try something a little bit different. I'm not going to tell you guys too much about that, but I'm thinking about changing up what I do with the F1 show, trying to do something really special for you guys that I think you guys will really love. But thank you guys for watching as always. If you want to contact me anything, I am on Twitter, trying to use Twitter a little bit more at the moment. I'm still a bit rusty with it, but we're slowly getting there. Also, we have a Patreon and a merch channel, which you can go check out in the description below. But don't worry about all that rubbish, guys. All I care about is you. Thank you so much for watching, and I care about your predictions as well, so I'd love to know what you think in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll see you in the next one.